Well, good morning, everybody. I want to welcome those who are joining us from my home base, the Olive Drive campus, as well as those who are watching online and on TV. This week, we had a team of 16 people from our church who were on a mission trip to Honduras, and we just got back last night at about 1 a.m. is when we kind of rolled into the church parking lot. And so I know in my preaching career, I've put many people to sleep, but I'm hoping that I don't fall asleep myself this morning as I preach. But it was a great week. We had, the last number I saw was 665 professions of faith, which is amazing. Praise God. When I left Honduras, that number said 666, but I think no one wanted to own that number, so maybe it got fuzzed a little bit, I don't know. But it was a great week. One of my favorite things about the week was on this trip, we had at least half of the team that this was their first evangelistic mission trip. And so it was just amazing seeing those people on an evangelistic mission trip for the first time and what that does in somebody's life. Well, next Sunday, we are going to begin preaching through the book of Revelation. So I know our church has been eagerly awaiting that. And so Lord willing, we're going to start that next Sunday. It's a great opportunity to invite people to church. So if there's someone you've been thinking about inviting them right at the beginning of this series on the book of Revelation would be a great opportunity. But this morning, I'm going to do something a little bit different. Our Wednesday evening service is kicking back off in a few weeks on August 24th. And this semester, I'm going to be preaching through the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start that Wednesday evening service by preaching the first sermon of that series this morning. And so today, we're going to be looking at Ecclesiastes chapter 1. Now, I'm entitling this series on Ecclesiastes, Enjoying Life to the Fullest, because I think that's what the book of Ecclesiastes is about. The book of Ecclesiastes was written by King Solomon, and Solomon was on a quest to figure out how to get the most out of life. And Solomon invites us to join him on his quest, because he wants to teach us how to get the most out of life. He wants to teach us how to enjoy life to the fullest. In the Bible, there are 66 different books. And do you know which book uses the word enjoy more than any other book of the Bible? You can probably guess where I'm going. It's the book of Ecclesiastes. The word enjoy is found 6 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a repeating chorus that keeps coming back throughout the book. It's a conclusion that Solomon keeps coming back to over and over in the book of Ecclesiastes. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Ecclesiastes 2:1. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with mirth, therefore enjoy pleasure. Ecclesiastes 2:24. Nothing is better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that his soul should enjoy good in his labor. This also I saw was from the hand of God. Ecclesiastes 2:25, for who can eat or have enjoyment more than I? Ecclesiastes 3:13, every man should eat and drink and enjoy the good of all his labor. It is the gift of God. Ecclesiastes 5:18, here is what I've seen. It is good and fitting for one to eat and drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor in which he toils under the sun all the days of his life which God gives him, for it is his heritage. Ecclesiastes 8:15. So I commended enjoyment, because man has nothing better under the sun than to eat, drink, and be merry. I love this last verse particularly. Solomon says, so I commended enjoyment. Doesn't that sound nice? The book of Ecclesiastes is a book that recommends enjoying life to the fullest. Now, there are 2 important terms that appear over and over in the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you're going to understand the book of Ecclesiastes, you have to get a handle on these 2 terms. The first term is the word vanity. The word vanity is found 38 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity describes how empty life often feels. Vanity describes how random and meaningless life often appears to be. Vanity describes how disappointing and unsatisfying life can be. The Hebrew word that we translate vanity is sort of the idea of being as empty as a breath of air, or as ephemeral as a wisp of smoke or a vapor. Maybe the way that I would say it is this: vanity is a big, empty nothing. Now, let me demonstrate vanity this morning. I have brought with me a special jar. I've left it up here on purpose to provoke anticipation so far throughout the sermon. And so you may have been wondering what this is all about. What I've got here is a jar of vanity. I actually, believe it or not, I brought this back from Honduras with me. And here I have a jar of vanity. And I brought this so that you could see with your own eyes what vanity looks like. So are you ready to see some vanity this morning? All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1, ta-da! Now you may be thinking, wait a minute, Brian, that's just an empty jar. There's nothing in it. And that's exactly my point. This is a jar of vanity. This is a jar of nothing. And life can often feel that way, can it? Have you ever felt let down by life? Have you ever felt confused by life or frustrated by life? Have you ever felt like there must be something more to it all than just this life? Well, if so, then the book of Ecclesiastes is the book of you. Is the book for you. Sorry, Honduras brain. Is the book for you. The second phrase that we have to get a handle on if we're going to understand the book of Ecclesiastes is the phrase under the sun. This phrase under the sun is repeated 27 times in the book of Ecclesiastes. Under the sun means that Solomon is describing what life looks like in this broken world. You see, when God created the world, it was good. We were good. But then Adam and Eve sinned. And when they sinned, they plunged the world into darkness. And now we live in a world under the sun that is full of pain and sorrow. So how do we enjoy life when we live in a world that is so catastrophically broken? Well, that's what Solomon wants us to learn from his book. Throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, it's like Solomon is switching back and forth between two pairs of glasses. He has his under the sun glasses, and he has a pair of above the sun glasses. When he puts on his under the sun glasses, those glasses are limited. They only take into account what happens in this life. The under the sun glasses filter God out of the equation. And you know what? It is very hard to answer life's deepest questions when you filter God out of the equation. The above the sun glasses, however, bring God back into the equation. When Solomon has on his under the sun glasses, life looks bleak and empty. When he puts on his above the sun glasses, then he's able to see a way to enjoy life despite its many difficulties. Now, Ecclesiastes has gained a bit of a reputation for being a depressing book. And I think the reason is because most people focus on the under the sun sections of the book of Ecclesiastes and forget about the above the sun sections. So let's jump in and join Solomon in his quest for happiness, in his quest for meaning, in his quest for answers. Let's look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1, starting in verse 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. Vanity of vanities. All is vanity. What profit has a man from all his labor in which he toils under the sun? Solomon says that everything is vanity. When we look at life, it often looks like there's no point to life. In fact, Solomon asks, what profit is there to all of this? Solomon's asking the question, in the end, what do we get out of life? Is there any meaning to life, or are we just wasting our time? Does anything we do actually matter? And Solomon's implied answer is no. At least when we are just looking at the life that is under the sun. Look with me in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 4. Solomon says, one generation passes away and another generation comes, but the earth abides forever. The sun also rises and the sun goes down and hastens to the place where it arose. The wind goes towards the south and turns to the north. The wind whirls about continually and comes again on its circuit. All the rivers run into the sea, yet the sea is not full. To the place from which the rivers come, there they return again. All things are full of labor. Solomon points out that billions of people come and go, but the earth goes on pretty much like it always has. Billions of people come and go, working, clawing, struggling their way through this life. But without God, what difference do they really make in the grand scheme of things? Without God, what do we have to show for all of our frenzied activity that actually lasts? We come and go, but during our short time here, do we really make any difference? Solomon's answer is no, not really. At least when we are looking at what is under the sun. What about those people who seem to have made a difference in this world, who seem to make a difference in history? Well, even if you do make a small change in this world, without God, it's still meaningless. Because if there's no God, then one day this whole world, in fact, this whole universe, will cease to exist. According to scientists, one day the sun will collapse on itself and engulf the earth in a giant supernova. Even if by some means we're able to escape the reach of that supernova by that point, scientists say that one day the universe will run out of usable energy and will grind to a halt, that the universe will eventually die a frozen nothingness, or maybe as Solomon would say it, a frozen vanity. And if that's true, then one day all that we've done to make a change in this universe will amount to nothing, and there'll be no one left to even remember anything we did anyways. Now, that's pretty depressing, right? Well, that's Solomon's point. Look with me in verse 8. Solomon says, all things are full of labor. Man cannot express it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. Solomon says that all things are full of labor. Most of us live life as a pretty monotonous cycle. We get up in the morning and go to work so that we can come home and go to sleep, so that we can get up in the morning and go to work, so that we can come home and go to sleep, so that we can get up in the morning and go to work, and so on and so on. And Solomon says, man cannot express it. What he means is that without God, man doesn't understand what's the point of it all anyways. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever been working really hard for something and you wonder if it's really worth it? I mean, you wonder sometimes what the point of it even is. We long for something that makes a difference. We long to do something that lasts. But under the sun, it looks like that nothing we do really matters at all. Despite all of man's frenzied activity, Solomon says they are never satisfied and they are never filled. People think if I just work harder, if I just do more, if I just accomplish more in life, then I can finally be happy. But let me ask you, it doesn't really work that way, does it? I mean, how many business deals does it take to truly be happy? How many promotions do you have to get to truly be happy? How many awards do you have to receive? How many products do you have to make to truly be happy? The United States is one of the hardest working countries, and yet we're also one of the saddest. After Tom Brady, the famous quarterback, won his third Super Bowl, he was interviewed by a reporter. And the reporter asked him, how do you feel now that you've won your third Super Bowl? And here is what Tom Brady said. Tom Brady said, maybe a lot of people would say, hey man, this is what it is. I've reached my goal, my dream. Me, I think there's got to be more than this. This can't be what it's cracked up to be. I've done it. I'm 27. What else is there for me? This can't be it. There's got to be more than the top of the mountain. Tom Brady said there's got to be more than the top of the mountain. Well, the good news is that there is more than the top of the mountain. There is the one who is above the mountains, the one who is higher than all of the fleeting mountain peaks that this life has to offer. And that's what Ecclesiastes is all about. Answering that question that all of us have deep down inside of us. The question, there's got to be more than this, right? You see, we were all born with an innate awareness that we were made for so much more than this life has to offer. Like Solomon, a lot of people spend their whole life searching for that something more. On another occasion, Tom Brady, you might be able to tell I just watched a Tom Brady documentary, but on another occasion, Tom Brady was asked this question. He was asked, of all the Super Bowl rings that you've won, which one is the best one? And you know what Tom Brady said? the next one. Isn't that how life always is under the sun? Which job will make us happy? The next one. Which boyfriend or girlfriend will make us happy? The next one. Which spouse will make us happy? The next one. Which house will make us happy? The next one. Which vacation will make us happy? The next one. Which promotion will make us happy? The next one. But still, our lives can seem so empty sometimes. You know why? Because it's hard to get very satisfied on a diet of this stuff. It's hard to get full up on a diet of nothing. But that right there is what most people in our culture are trying to fill up on. They're trying to fill up on a whole bunch of vanity. Look with me at verse 9. Solomon says, "That which has been is what will be. That which is done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there anything of which it may be said, 'See, this is new'? It has already been in ancient times before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of things that are to come by those who will come after." Everybody wants to be remembered for what they've done in this life. But Solomon challenges us to ask the question, how long will it be till no one under the sun even remembers that we ever existed? There are 8 billion people on planet Earth right now. Of all those 8 billion people, how many of them are going to be remembered 100 years from now? How many of them will be remembered 1,000 years from now? Look with me at verse 12. Solomon says, "I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, and I set my heart to seek and search out by wisdom concerning all that is done under heaven, this burdensome task God has given to the sons of man, by which they may be exercised. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and indeed, all is vanity and grasping for the wind. What is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered." Solomon set out to understand why it's so hard to find satisfaction in life. And he concludes that trying to find the meaning of life without considering the creator of life is like grasping at the wind. But isn't that what people around us are doing all the time? Our culture is full of people grasping at the wind. People who are flailing about desperately trying to find something to hold on to in this life, something to cling to. But the harder they grasp, the more that real lasting significance escapes through their fingers. And for most people in our culture, all they end up with is a big handful of nothing. Or, as Solomon would say, a big handful of vanity. Solomon says, what is crooked cannot be made straight, and what is lacking cannot be numbered. Now remember that Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived. And yet, even with Solomon's great wisdom, he knew that there were some problems in life that were even beyond his ability to solve. You see, Solomon knew that he wasn't God, and neither are we. You see, we can't change the past. We can't untangle all the tangled knots of life. We can't seem to force this life to behave the way that we want it to, can we? Have you ever tried to do that? Have you ever tried to force life to behave the way you want it to? I'm guessing you probably don't have a very successful track record with that. And that's why we have so much trouble finding real happiness, at least when we're looking for it under the sun. Look with me at verse 16, the last part of chapter 1. Solomon says, I communed with my heart, saying, look, I have attained greatness and have gained more wisdom than all who were before me in Jerusalem. My heart has understood great wisdom and knowledge, and I set my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is grasping for the wind. For in much wisdom there's much grief, and he who increases knowledge increases sorrow. Solomon says, I have attained greatness. How many people can truly say that? And yet all of that greatness couldn't give Solomon the happiness he was looking for. One of the biggest hits in the last few years was a depressing song called Everything I Wanted, and it actually won a Grammy for Record of the Year in 2021. And in that song, the singer says, I had a dream that I got everything I wanted, or maybe it was a nightmare. Have you ever felt that way? Have you ever got the very thing that you wanted, that very thing that you thought would make you happy, only to find out that it was another letdown in a long series of letdowns? Solomon was experiencing that kind of nightmare. He had gotten everything that everyone wants in life, and yet still wasn't happy. Kurt Cobain was someone who seemed to have gained all that this world has to offer. Kurt Cobain was the front man of the influential rock band called Nirvana. And there were millions of Gen X teenagers who would have given anything to have Kurt Cobain's life. He had it all: money, fame, success. And yet, none of that could make Kurt Cobain happy. And so tragically, on April 5th, 1944, Kurt Cobain took his own life. In Kurt's suicide note, he talks about how he had gotten to the point where he had tried everything this world had to offer and still had not found anything that could make him happy. And I want to read to you a couple of lines from Kurt Cobain's suicide note. Here's what Kurt wrote. He said, "I haven't felt the excitement of music for too many years now. For example, when we're backstage and the lights go out and the manic roar of the crowd begins, it doesn't affect me the way in which it did. Sometimes I feel I should have a punch-in clock before I walk out on stage. I've tried everything within my power to appreciate it, but it's not enough." Kurt Cobain had reached the top. He had reached the pinnacle of success, and yet he said, it's not enough. What haunting words. Being a rich and famous rock star and playing live for thousands of people every night wasn't enough. And that's exactly Solomon's point, that without God, life under the sun is simply not enough. Solomon said that he had gained more wisdom than anyone before him. Remember, Solomon was the wisest man who ever lived, and yet even he couldn't make sense of life sometimes. Without God, no amount of education can fix the problems of life. In fact, sometimes the more we know, the more depressed we get. That's what Solomon means when he says, "For in much wisdom there is much sorrow, and he who increases knowledge increases grief," right? You see, the problem is, the harder you think about life under the sun, the more depressed you get. It's like watching the news. I mean, you feel worse after watching the news, not better, right? Some researchers even think that there is a link between intelligence and depression. People with a high IQ often analyze everything to death. They think hard about everything. They can identify the problems of this life, but they can't come up with any solutions. And that's pretty depressing. And that's Solomon's point, that this life that we're living under the sun can be very depressing, especially when we're only focusing on what's happening under the sun. Now, in this chapter, in chapter 1, Solomon never comes up for air. He spends the whole chapter with his under the sun glasses on. We'll have to wait to chapter 2 to see him put on his above the sun glasses back on and be able to find hope. The question of Ecclesiastes is this: how can we find joy and satisfaction in life? Where do we go to find the answers for our biggest questions and our deepest longings? What's Solomon's answer to this dilemma? Well, you're going to have to come back on Wednesday nights to find out, all right? Because Solomon is going to spend the whole book unpacking that answer. But fear not, because you're here this morning, I want to reward you for coming, and so I will skip ahead and give you the punchline this morning. Here's the punchline. In the end, Solomon concludes that enjoying a life of purpose and satisfaction has to begin with faith in God. Life in of itself cannot supply the answers we're looking for. Those answers only come from God. Life in of itself cannot make us happy. True happiness only comes from knowing and following God, from focusing on who is above the sun and what is beyond this life. As we continue to learn from Solomon, we're going to see that it is possible to enjoy life, and that what we do really does matter, but only when we take into account the above the sun perspectives that we're going to learn in the book of Ecclesiastes. You see, in order to enjoy life, you have to look to the one who is above the sun. The rest of the Bible makes the same argument. The rest of the Bible argues that the only thing that can truly satisfy us in life is a relationship with Jesus Christ. In fact, look with me at John chapter 10, verse 10. Look with me in the second half of this verse. Jesus says, "I have come that they may have life and that they may have it more abundantly." You see, Jesus didn't just come to give us eternal life in the next life. He also came to give us an abundant life in this life. And the good news is that this abundant life is free for the taking. Look with me at Isaiah chapter 55, starting in verse 1. God says, "Ho, everyone who thirsts, come to the waters. And you who have no money, come, buy and eat. Yes, come, buy wine and milk without money and without price. Why do you spend money for what is not bread and your wages for what does not satisfy? Listen carefully to me and eat what is good, and let your soul delight itself in abundance." This passage is an invitation to everyone who is thirsty for something more in this life. This passage is an invitation for everyone who is hungry for a life of meaning and significance. The invitation is to come to God, because God is the only one who can truly quench our thirst and satisfy that deep hunger within us. And notice that this passage says that God gives these waters of life freely, without money and without price. You see, most people think that you have to pay for your own salvation, that you have to earn it. But the Bible says Jesus already earned it for us. All we have to do is accept his invitation by believing in him. And that's what this passage encourages all of us to do. And if we do accept that invitation to come to God, then verse 2 says that our soul will delight itself in abundance. Doesn't that sound nice? Wouldn't you like to have a life where your soul is delighting itself in abundance? Well, the good news is we can have that. That's the offer that God puts on the table. And with that kind of offer on the table, why would we waste our lives on things that cannot really satisfy? In fact, that's the question that's asked in verse 2 of this passage. God says, why would you spend your money for what is not bread and your wages for what does not satisfy? Why would you waste your life on unsatisfying things? That's the same question that Solomon is asking in the book of Ecclesiastes. Why would we waste our whole life looking for satisfaction in things that are under the sun that can never truly fulfill the desires of our heart? That's the same question Jesus asked when he said, "For what is it for a man to gain the whole world and yet lose his own soul?" That's the same mistake that God warns us about in Jeremiah 2:13. Look with me at Jeremiah 2:13. God says, "For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn themselves cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water." This verse says that God is like a fountain of fresh water. But instead, so many people turn to broken cisterns to get their thirst quenched in life. What is a broken cistern? Well, a cistern is a way of holding water in the Middle East. It's a pot or some sort of container that's built into the dirt. A broken cistern is when that pot has cracks in it and can no longer hold water, and all of the water just seeps out into the dirt. So I believe I have a picture of a broken cistern up on the screen. And this metaphor of broken cisterns represent all of the false gods of this life who promise happiness but can't really deliver on their promises. And throughout the book of Ecclesiastes, Ecclesiastes is going to deal with a lot of these broken cisterns of life and show how each one of them cannot truly satisfy us in our quest for happiness. But, like Jeremiah points out, sadly, the broken cisterns are the ones that we usually end up running to. Most people spend their whole life sucking the dirt when they could drink freely of the refreshing, clean water that Jesus provides. That thirst that we all have inside of us, it should drive us to Jesus to get that thirst satisfied. In fact, listen with me to a quote from C.S. Lewis. This is a great quote. This is one of the reasons C.S. Lewis was probably the most important Christian thinker in the last 100 years. C.S. Lewis wrote this. He said, "It would seem that our Lord finds our desires not too strong, but too weak. We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a vacation at the beach. We are far too easily pleased. This exactly is the point of Ecclesiastes, that we should look to God to satisfy our desires, not the impotent trinkets of life under the sun. The disappointments of life should drive us to look elsewhere for answers, to drive us to look somewhere besides life to get our needs met. In fact, look what C.S. Lewis said in another place. C.S. Lewis said, "If I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world." And this exactly is what Solomon's going to be teaching us throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. In conclusion this morning, when I was young, there was a time when I fell into a terrible depression because I was focusing on the things under the sun. I grew up in San Diego, California, and I did not grow up in a Christian home. I did not grow up going to church. And when I was young, there was a lot of bad stuff that happened in our family. And because of it, I grew up filled with anger and depression. And it got so bad that by the time I was 8 years old, I decided that I had enough with life under the sun, that life was too full of pain. And so I decided that I would commit suicide. But praise God, my mom walked in and saw what I was doing and stopped me. But my life really got worse from there. When I became a teenager, I tried to solve that emptiness inside of me with sin. But the more sin I did, the more miserable and sad and depressed I became. But finally, when I was 16 years old, my big day came. There was a man standing outside of my high school passing out free Bibles. And he handed one to me. And at first I thought, what do I want this stupid thing? And I was going to toss it in the gutter, but the guy was right there, so I thought, I'll put it in my backpack. Then when I get around the corner, then I'll toss it in the gutter. But the corner was a long way away, and I forgot about it. But then later on that day, I remembered, wait a minute, I still have that Bible thing that weirdo guy on the street corner gave me. Fast forward, now I'm the weirdo guy on the street corner. But anyways. And for the first time in my life, I got curious about the Bible. I had never thought about the Bible before. But in that moment, I thought, you know what? There's a lot of commotion about this Bible. People fight wars over it. I had a friend who was a goth who had burned a Bible. People pass it out on street corners. And so I said, I'm going to find out what all the fuss is about. And so I opened it up, and I started reading, and I found out that I was a sinner. And once I started thinking about that, I thought, you know what? That's probably true. That makes a lot of sense. And then I found out that God loved me and that he sent Jesus to die for me and to come back from the dead. And if I would just believe in him, I could be saved. And so I went home, I knelt down on the edge of my bed, and I said, God, I barely even know who you are, but please come and save me. And he saved me. I mean, something happened. It was like a weight was lifted off my shoulder. It felt like I'd been set free. And it was the first time in my life that I knew what it felt like to experience joy and peace and purpose. And now, I enjoy life way more now that I've believed in Jesus than I ever did when I was looking for happiness under the sun. Now, I'm not saying that once you believe in Jesus, all your problems go away. But what I am saying is that once you have God in your life, it is possible to find a way to enjoy life despite all of its problems. The theme of the book of Ecclesiastes is that life without God is vanity. It's joyless. It's empty. It's unsatisfying. A life without God is a wasted life. A life without God leads to a depressing, frustrated life. A life without God is nothing more than a sad joke and misses the whole reason we even exist. We don't want to live that kind of life, do we? Well, the good news is you don't have to. It's possible to have the abundant life that Jesus was talking about, the abundant life we were always meant to have. But it all begins with putting your faith in Jesus. You see, Jesus came to take your death so that he could give you life, real life, abundant life, and all of it is free for the taking. If you will just come to Jesus and believe in the one who is above the sun.